Madam Speaker. I want to ask the government a bit of a broader question. The member spoke about including the voices of Indigenous peoples, consultation, self-government, etc. But I know in many cases there's a tension between the government's stated goals with respect to climate policy and what individual Indigenous nations may be asking for. There's a case now we have of over 130 Indigenous nations taking the government to court over their carbon tax policy. I've heard from Indigenous communities, for instance in the north, that there was a complete lack of consultation before the government imposed development bans. We heard this on a Foreign Affairs Committee trip a number of years ago to the Northwest Territories, that the consultation before imposing a development moratorium was a phone call 45 minutes before an announcement was made. So it seems that the government has a bit of a problem in cases where Indigenous peoples are calling for policies that contradict with the government's stated goals when it comes to their so-called climate policy. So I'd like to ask the Prime Secretary directly, in instances where there's a conflict, what should win out? The government's intentions with regards to a carbon tax or blocking development, or the wishes of Indigenous people?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for this question. I think it's important that all members of this House, try not to use Indigenous people as a pawn in their political games or their partisan, ideology. And what we're seeing really playing out with this conversation right now is actually a misrepresentation of what's happening. Indigenous peoples are on the front line of what's happening with the climate crisis, and they really want us to act. And they know that in most cases, and the leadership that I've spoken to, that there's a consensus that the pricing mechanisms are what really can get us further on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and Indigenous peoples want to be partners with that. The conversation that's happening around Ontario Chiefs, important conversation to have, and it's really about them wanting a more equitable stake in what's happening around our approach to the environment. And so we're going to have that conversation. I really look forward to the judicial review and what comes out of that. But again, it's important to really deal in facts, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that Indigenous peoples are there with us as wanting to confront this climate crisis head on. Thank you.